So today we're going to talk about this idea of motivation and self-discipline. And we're going to hone in on a very specific concept of how does your attitude really impact everything that's happening in your life, including your peace. So how is motivation tied to self-discipline? I get that question asked a lot when we talk about this, and the reality is that motivation and self-discipline are both attributes that I have control over. A lot of times we go through our lives and we think that this is happening to me or this person's doing this to me, when in reality it's my reactions and how I'm reacting to that situation that's really causing me either the stress, the frustration, or the anger. And it's really up to me to determine how I deal with that. So the question that I really like to pose back is that, well, how is your attitude directly impacting both self-discipline and motivation? So as we talk about this idea of motivation and self-discipline, I want to give you 3 key ingredients that I use to help me to understand where I'm at and what I can do to control those kinds of things. First is, do I understand what my values are and how important those values are to me? We'll go a little more in depth in what that means and how I apply that, but that's the first step, is to truly understand what are my values. Second would be, what's my attitude? How does my attitude impacting my ability to do whatever it is I'm trying to do? And am I aware of that? And do I understand the consequences of that attitude? And then the third thing, then, it kind of all ends up in my actions. Like, how does it play out? How am I behaving because of that? And all 3 of these are tied in this idea of my ability to manage what's happening to me in my life. The motivation that I sense is all tied to these 3 things and how these 3 things are interacting with each other. So to do that, I'd like to present a chart and kind of go through this chart with you to help you to understand what it is that you can do, what I've been able to do to help me understand to get better behavior and better results. So when we talked about those 3 things, I introduced those 3 things to you. Let's see how they play out in this chart. So you can see over here on this side, we start with our values. Then we move into our attitude, and then we end up with our actions, or what I would refer to as our behaviors. So how does this play out? My grandson last night, talking with him, and he's trying to understand, well, what is this? What do you mean by values, Pa? And so I talked about values, and we just used, because we had an experience earlier in the day, and I said, so for example, there's this value called honesty. I said, you want to be honest, don't you? He says, yeah, I want to be honest. Well, on a scale of 1 to 5, how honest do you really want to be? Most of us would probably say, well, 5, right? So I'll circle that. How important honesty to me is a 5. So now how does that play out? Well, now it comes down to, all of a sudden, I'm in a circumstance or situation. I get caught. Let's say, earlier in the day, one of his little brothers, nobody knew how he ended up getting this item that he had. And when he was asked by his siblings, so did you take that from your friend today? And he's like, no, I didn't take that from my friend, no. And you kind of, you don't know whether he was really telling the truth or not, but his action was somewhere, we'll say maybe about a 2, or let's give him the benefit of 3. Wasn't quite honest, don't really know if he was being dishonest, but just wasn't. So his action came out in this idea that maybe not quite. And so when we have this disconnect now, and I'll draw a line. So if we have a value of 5 and an action of a 3, what that does for us internally is it creates disharmony. Whenever our actions are in alignment to our values, we know internally, we have this internal system inside that says we're just not quite right. Causes stress for some of us. Causes this feeling of self-esteem is impacted just a little bit because we know that we're not doing what we believe we should be doing, right? When we're totally in harmony, if my value is a 5, then my action should be a 5. Right? And that's the concept here. But this idea of our attitude is critical in this equation. So what is the attitude? So the attitude, as we're talking about in regards to this model, is the attitude is what's the temporary emotion that I'm feeling that's driving the action? So back to my little grandson. What do you think the temporary emotion that was driving his ability to sit there and say, so did you take that from your friend today? And his initial, in that moment, emotion was what? I don't want to get in trouble. right? I don't want to, and so his attitude directly then impacted how he acted and behaved in that way. And we all do that. And that's a simple little example of a little kid, but think about an experience that maybe you had last week, where you have this value, you have that value at a high level, but then you noticed throughout the week that somehow your actions weren't operating at that same level. Whether you're aware of it or not, it's having an impact on how you feel about yourself in that moment and that day. So how do we use this knowledge now to begin to change and improve and ultimately to have more peace in our life? Because as I talk to a lot of people and as I go around, that's one of the things that's missing for a lot of people in their world, is this idea of just having peace. We live in a world that's under a lot of stress, a lot of conflict that's going on. We're driving down the roads. There's all kinds of, the other day on the freeway, there was a wreck and people were backed up for 2 or 3 hours, right? So there's just things that are happening to us. So where do we get peace in those moments? Now back to this idea that we have of how our attitude can impact our peace, which is really how our attitude brings our actions in alignment to our values. Does that make sense? If you think about it for just a second, as you think about something that happened to you in your life, you got this value, you acted in a way that wasn't really aligned to that. The key element in that is, I could just focus on trying to become better, right? Focus on my actions. But really, have you ever thought about stopping and saying, well, what was my attitude in that moment? And what could I do to improve my attitude? So I love the concept because it makes it simpler for me. I don't have to worry about, I already know what my values are. I already kind of know what my actions are on a daily basis. I'm constantly trying to be better from an action perspective, but now I've never really thought about, what if I just improved my attitude? If I was sitting on the freeway for 2.5 hours yesterday, just angry and frustrated and, as compared to, well, just turn the car off, grab my book and read a book, or go watch my YouTube videos on my YouTube channel. Whatever it is, right? There's things that I can do that just can give me peace in those moments, and my attitude is a key element in that. So what I'd like to leave you with is this. If you want to gain greater peace in your life, then start looking at and evaluating your attitudes. Not necessarily your actions, not necessarily your values, because we're already pretty aware of those, but are you really aware of your attitude and the impact your attitude can have on bringing more peace in your life? So one of the things we'd like to invite you to do is click below in the description. There's a little button that says More. Click on that More and take our free assessment and begin your journey to understand a little bit more about yourself so that you can start evaluating your values and your attitudes and compare those to your actions. But more importantly, again, remember, it's your attitude that determines your peace as you're going through your life. And as you do that, you can help us on our journey of helping us put the human back into humanity.